Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And this week's episode is going to be an exciting follow-up to our discussion of vacation games with impressions on the games we've played. Power Grid and what it's like playing that game with a group of environmental engineers. A discussion of Reiner Knizia's Babylonia with a group of non-gamers. The Mind and more. We'll also just delve into various sundries, things about the show, maybe read a few reviews, a discussion of a game both Jake and I love at the end of the episode. It's going to be really good and maybe a little bit looser than some of the episodes you've heard in the past.
You might be thinking, this doesn't sound exactly like every other episode of Decision Space. And it's not. You know, this is a little bit of odds and ends as Brendan and I both return from our own various trips. Brendan for the week, me a long weekend. But we wanted to give you something in your feed anyway. And I think that if you stick around, that you'll probably enjoy the conversation. For our pre-planners, those of you who like to play games along with us, you should know that next week we'll be covering Agricola. Following that, the next two games in our queue are Blood Rage and Dice Hospital. And all three of those games are available to play on Board Game Arena if you want to go check them out there.
I'm really excited for all three of these games for really different reasons. And right before we started recording, Jake and I were talking about, like, are we ready for Agricola? And I feel like we came to the conclusion that one could never really be ready to cover Agricola in depth. It's just such a big game. And I've played it maybe 20 times at this point. So I'm really excited to talk about subsistence farming in some vaguely European setting.
Yeah, and I've played it 3.5 times. But in all honesty, like, there are so many people out there that have played this game 20 times, 30 times, 100 times, 200 times. And, you know, the reality is we're never going to get to that level of competence with it. So even though it's this like legendary foundational game, I still think it makes sense just to kind of treat it the same way that we would any game, which is, you know, we play it as much as we can until we feel like we have a good grasp of it, and then do the best we can to convey the decisions within it. And I think that approach might actually reveal some insights. And as always, if people are really experienced with it and want to come and tell us how we're wrong in our Discord, we have a Discord. You can join that by looking at the link that is shared in the description of this podcast. That'd be like probably the best place to go to tell us that we're wrong.
I like pigs.
And the other place you could tell us that we're wrong is on email, or you could even leave us a review on this podcast. I wanted to read one now because I think we got a really interesting and insightful one. And it's just always so great to get reviews. So, Brendan, if it's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and share a review we just received from Quickspace. Quickspace gave us 5 stars, and they said, I enjoy this podcast quite a bit. It's rewarding to listen to a show that really gets into how a game plays out and what works and what does not. My only caveat is that it's not as interesting to me to listen to episodes about games that I've not played, but that's a tough problem to address. This is really subjective, but I think Jake and Brendan have good taste both in choosing games and evaluating them. They like the parts that are likable and dislike the rest.
Oh, yeah. I like this review.
I like it too. Yeah.
This is a good review.
It's a good review. And I think, like, just, you know, speaking totally frankly, I think that is a huge challenge that we've thought about a lot with regard to our show and our format. So, Brendan, I want to run an idea by you that I haven't actually talked to you about, and maybe we could talk about whether it might be a good fit for our podcast. So what I was thinking is, you know how a lot of shows do like a retrospective segment, like, oh, we covered this game a year ago and this is what we think about it now. I think that one possibility could be bringing in something like that, starting with, like, we could either start with like our first episode where we covered like Kanagawa and do like a little thing where we talk about it. But I think what would be really cool, because of the nature of our show, is if we sort of like sourced out feedback that we get from our show from people that have played the game more, and read like a few quotes. And then that could also be something that people contribute to in our Discord, right? We could almost create like a whole like feedback channel or something where people could give us feedback about games. So that's idea number 1. Okay. I have a different idea too. And I don't know, maybe you could tell me if you like 1 better, 2 better, or neither. And we'll
Okay.
keep thinking about it if it's neither. And that'd be totally fine.
Okay.
Okay. So the second idea would be that instead of going all the way back to episode 1, so we would just do this in like the episodes that are not the what we talk about ones, but the game design focused, or not game design, you know what I mean, the game feature ones, where we could do, instead of 1 year retrospective, we could do like a segment on the feedback that we received like over the last week. So like on our next one, if Isle of Cats was the last game, we could almost like start off the episode and be like, and here's a little bit of like thoughts from people that have played Isle of Cats like way more than us and how they reacted to the episode. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're
A little
saying.
different.
Okay. I am nervous about the idea of adding another segment every week because I feel like we already run kind of long and we like when we get to really dive deep on topics. And I'm saying we, and I think what I mean is me. But I really like the idea of number 1, where we go back and revisit games that we've covered in the past. But I don't love the idea of dedicating a whole episode to that. But I think it could be really cool if we combined the 2 ideas and sort of said, okay, it's been X amount of time. We're going to do an episode where we look at Kanagawa, Carpe Diem, Underwater Cities.
Like a right, like we do
Yeah.
like a 5 to like 10 game chunk.
Exactly. Maybe, yeah, somewhere in there. And then we like get feedback from all the experts in our decision space community that are so awesome on those games where like these are things maybe we missed. We bring in that expert opinion. I love when other podcasts, I listen to this podcast called Retronauts that's really amazing. And every once in a while they do a mailbag episode. And it's basically just listeners write in about their experience with a game. And I love that because it brings in this sort of other perspective. And sometimes it validates and sometimes it offers a different view. And that's awesome. And I think that could be interesting. And it might also be interesting. I don't think I could go back and play while still preparing for new episodes like those games 10 times. But I bet I could go back and play. We could play Carpe Diem once.
I don't even think it's that valuable for us to like intentionally replay a game. I think it's more value to be like, okay, so we recorded this game a year ago and we said we loved it and would keep playing
Do
it.
we still love it?
Did we actually do that or not? You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is I want to play Carpe Diem again.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I want to play Res Arcana again. But we did say we would cover Res Arcana again. So like I sort of feel compelled to, okay, we should play it at least once and then see. Like I could see the 5 episode chunked retrospective combining.
I like that idea.
Things.
I like that idea quite a bit.
Okay, let's keep ruminating.
We'll keep ruminating. And if you have ideas about this and want to share with us, of course, we'd love to have them. I want all of our episodes to be appealing to everybody who subscribes to this podcast. And like, you know, that's why I was kind of thinking like it as a segment could make sense in some way. But I mean, that maybe is an impossible standard.
Totally. And I also think that I love that the word that really struck out to me from Quick Space's review was rewarding. And that word as a piece of feedback makes me feel really proud of the work that we've done on the show to sort of lock morsels of insightful information away in those game episodes where if you have engaged with the game, it gives you something really meaty to chew on. And I think even in cases where you haven't, I hope to do this even more, we sort of bring in perspective and history that contextualizes the game in a way that even if you haven't played the game, there's probably value. Like our Tigris and Euphrates episode, I hope that you didn't have to play Tigris and Euphrates to enjoy that episode. And I don't think you did. So even more, if we can do that and sort of build up that reputation, I think over time, maybe we can pull people into the game episodes they haven't listened to. And also, you can always like quickly skim a rule book, I think, and get
Nobody's
a sense
going
enough.
to do that.
Jake, they are.
I would never
me?
do that.
You don't read rule books on airplanes?
Like prior to like listening to a podcast episode? No. I expect to like be like spoon fed everything I need to know.
I always come on the show and Jake tells me I'm such a weirdo.
No, that's not. No, it's different strokes, but I'm definitely in the majority on this one. But anyway, maybe you found that discussion interesting, and if it's brought on any ideas, definitely let us know. You can join the Discord. You can leave us a review, and both of those things would be immensely appreciated. And you know what? Just listening to the show, being here now in it of itself, that is perfectly fine too. Thank you for being here. Brendan, what do you say we get into what we said we were going to talk about, and kind of do the part 2 of the vacation game.
Yeah, let's do it, which is part 1 of this podcast, which is like games we've been playing, taking turns in. I'm really excited for this one, Jake. I want to hear, I've heard that you played a heavy hitter. You actually alluded to the fact that you'd be playing it. And it's a game I've never played. And I think now I'm totally bearing the lead. And I love when we do this. So I'm just going to keep doing it because I know everyone's wondering about what game I'm actually talking about. I'm just not going to say it. I'm going to talk about how excited I am about it. And how when I first started playing board games in the hobby, everyone talked about this game and how it was a game that you just had to experience. And now I feel like people don't talk about it. It's kind of disappeared. It's a Friedman Freeze game.
Oh, now
What
people are now they know.
Now people
like
are really wondering.
This game is Power Grid. The best known Friedman and Freeze game. Friedman and Freeze? Freedom and Freeze?
Friedman Freeze.
Like Friedman? Like my name?
Yeah, Friedman Freeze.
His first name is my last name?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway.
Friedman Freeze.
Yeah, Friedemann. Okay. Okay. Anyway, it's Power Grid, and this is actually a game that I had never played before. A game that I own. Just as a super sort of side, I bought this game from somebody who was doing like a moving, and they had like packed it away into like a smaller box.
Huh,
okay, so it has everything you need, but it's in like a much smaller box, and the board is like stored separately. I think because of that, I absolutely like never played it because it's just like a white nondescript looking box on my shelf.
Yeah.
So I just, I never think like I'm going to pull this out. So I've owned it for like 5 years, never once really even considered playing it. But I headed to Denver over the weekend to my friend's wedding. I have a group chat with a bunch of college friends, and somebody posts in the group chat like, "Hey, if you don't have anything going on, Sunday morning, the day of the wedding, like we're gonna be getting together to play Power Grid." And I was like, "Hey, that sounds like something I might be interested to do." So I jumped in the game of Power Grid, and what I quickly realized was that the groom and his friends are very serious Power Grid players. Like this is their game. And the other thing I learned while the setup was going on was that I was sitting down to play this game of Power Grid with a bunch of literal renewable energy engineers. So they were like, not only do they just like sit around and apparently play Power Grid all day, but they like are subject matter experts on the theme of this game. So it's just like this kind of amazing thing. If you haven't played Power Grid, it's kind of a difficult game to quickly give you the synopsis of. Essentially, you are kind of building a network across a board. There are a bunch of different maps you can pick up for this game. We played on the original. I requested the original Germany map because it was my first time playing the game. So what you do is first there's an auction phase where you will bid on different power plants. There's different types of power plant. There's some power plants that consume coal, some that consume trash, some that consume nuclear energy, and some that are oil, and some that are renewable resource power plants, and those don't require any fuel at all. So you bid for power plants. They all cost varying resources and power a varying number of cities. Then there's a kind of an auction for resources. So very simple, like supply and demand system here, where if a lot of people are trying to power coal power plants, then coal becomes more expensive very quickly because everybody's trying to buy it. And the same thing with all of them. So you take turns buying resources, then you're placing out, paying money to place out little cities on the map, and then you get money at the end based on how many cities that you're able to power using your power plants and burning fuel. And then you just repeat that loop until the game is over, essentially. I had a really good time playing this. Playing with like a very experienced group. I ended up finishing dead last, but the actual like end game condition in this was to have X number of cities connected, and then the winner is the person that. So basically, in the 4-player game, which is what we played, you had to have 17 cities in your network. That would trigger the end game, and then whoever powered the most cities at the end of the game won. So I got up to 17 cities and powered them all in that final turn.
Nice.
But the winning person had powered 18 cities, and second had also powered 18 cities, and then third had powered 17, and I also powered 17. But then it's like the tiebreaker is like how much leftover money you had. So it was like a super tight game. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else there is to say about it. It was very enjoyable. I think like now that I've played it, like the question I've been asking myself is like, am I going to now like get my copy of
Mm,
Power Grid to the table? And I'm not like sure that I will. I think it's a little long, a little complicated, I think, for like the decision space payout. But I think like a lot of people love this game for very good reason. It's definitely the type of game that, because like the interaction is so high, the economies are like very like it feels like a very like grokkable economic game in a way, you know. So I think like people who are not like don't want to go full like 18xx like super heavy but do want to play an economic game, like this is probably a good one to go for.
that's really cool. Also, it's amazing to hear just how tight the game was with all of you coming in within one or two, like within one connected city. That's amazing. A few things. One, I just looked it up. I was curious about. I sort of built up this reputation of Power Grid, and at one point in time, this was the number 2 ranked game on Board Game Geek. So it's not an overstatement to say that this game like totally enraptured the board game community for many years. And it came out in 2004, and it sort of still had that reputation into the early aughts and really had this huge reputation. But I think one of the chief criticisms at that point in time that was sort of levied against it, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, Jake, is that the amount of calculation that you had to do in the game was just a little bit too much. Like that, like, oh, we're going to play Power Grid. Everyone bring your old solar calculators. You're going to really need it for this one. Did you find that it was a calculation heavy experience?
So I had heard that concern, and it was not as bad as I thought it would be. Like in general, like there's a lot of times that you have to like do very simple math. Like every time you
Hmm.
expand your city, you just have to like add the cost to expand a city, which is like 10, 15, or 20, basically depending on what phase of the game you're in, plus the variable cost of like the network. Like there's basically like a little path between each city that has a variable cost to it. So it could be like 2 to like 21 or something, just depending on where you want to go. So if
Okay.
you're trying to like connect 3 cities in a turn, you're that's like a bunch of math. Not like a bunch, you know, but like simple addition to just like figure out, okay, what's the cost, and you kind of sometimes you're like, you don't care where you're putting them, you just want to do it the cheapest way possible. So there's like can be like a bit of like looking at the map and just like figuring out what's your cheapest expansion routes. So I mean, it's not like great, you know, it doesn't add a lot to the game, and it takes a bit, but it wasn't like horrible. I guess the issue though is like if you wanted to, you could add up that, also like figure out, you know, the cost of your likely cost of resources, and do that like prior to making any bids.
Yeah.
And it didn't really come up until the very last auction of the game. So you can only have 3 power plants at a time, and they can each power a variable number of cities. So I had kind of made like a rookie error and totally shot myself in the foot going to the last round, where I had 3 power plants that were all could power 5 cities, and there was only 15 max. And then
Yeah.
when we got to the auction phase, there was only one power plant out there that could power 7 cities.
So you needed it.
So
You
so
had to
I had
overspend.
to have it. I had to
Yeah.
have it. Um, and another person in the game who was I was like not in contention to win. Um, and the other person in the game could have potentially won, because that power plant would have enabled them to get up to 18, right?
Yep.
And it basically created this situation where like he had done all the math, okay, like to
Yeah.
figure out exactly what he could bid. And he was like, you know, so the cost of the thing is like 50, it's like your minimum bid base, you know. We're up to, he's like 71, you know, he's like 70, 80, I'm like 81, you know, just like going up and up, and he's like looking at me like I'm crazy. I like explained it to him, was like, dude, I have to have that because, you know, this is the situation I'm in. Like, just let me have it. And he's like, well, I also need to have it. And then so he kept bidding up, and I kept bidding more. He's like, dude, you're crazy. Like, you're not going to be able to do anything. Like, have you even done your math? I'm like, I'm just like inferring. I'm doing like back of the napkin math. And he got like kind of annoyed, like, I'll do the math for you. And he like kind of came over to like my side of the table, like count up my money and my routes. And he's like, oh, you actually could spend quite a bit. And it
Be
turned out,
reasonable, Jake.
yeah. So it turned out like the cost that I could afford was
Was
that he
greater
could
than his
not
cost.
was
Yeah.
$102. So I got it for
Wow.
like exactly market price. It's like the market demanded that was like the only that I would have to spend that much. And I did, and it ended up shooting us both in the foot. So he ended up not getting third, and I ended up getting fourth.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
so definitely that was like the only point of the game where I was like, okay, like this is
Math.
kind of silly. So
Yeah.
I was like trying to cover up my money a little bit, like as a joke. I was like, I don't want to do the math. Like I just want to play. I think this is gonna
Yeah.
work out. And he was like, not acceptable. Like that's
Uh,
in their magic circle, they do the math.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's super interesting, Jake. I guess one more quick question. We spent a fair amount of time on Power Grid, but
This is my most interesting thing. So
For
in my
sure.
list of games. So the other
what's
ones will be
your
quick.
favorite decision that you made, would you say? Or like the coolest decision you saw at the table?
The coolest part of the game to me was the way turn order worked. So basically, if you're first in turn order, that means so basically turn order is calculated by how many cities you have out on the board. So if I have 10 cities and you have 9, then I'm going to be 1, you're going to be 2, and then if we're both at 9, it's whoever has the highest valued power plant. So like you have a power plant that's number 39, I have 37, then okay, you're ahead of me. And the way it works, if I remember correctly, is like in the first person has to make the first bid on a power plant, which is strategically disadvantageous because you get to like
You
the
get
other
stuck
people
with
get
stuff.
to right. And if you're like the last person to bid, so basically you can only get one power plant turn. So if you're the last person to bid, you get a power plant at cost or cheaper because of this other like little mechanism where like a power plant can be whatever the cheapest power plant like out on the board in the auction is $1.
Okay.
And then you switch to like the resource bidding thing, which is like, and it goes in reverse player order there. So like the first coal off the board that you buy costs like 1, but then like but then it gets like more and more expensive as it goes. So if you're like the last person to bid for coal, you might be paying like $17 for what the first person to go paid $3 for or whatever.
Interesting.
So there's like really cool strategic considerations of like when do you want to actually like expend money to like jump out for, because you also get money like income for how many cities you have powered. So it's like you want to play the cities, but at the same time, like there's like moments where you like have all this money and like could do a lot, and you just say like, nope, I'm gonna like not do that so that I can like do more on my next turn. And I thought those like strategic considerations were for me like the big highlight of the game.
Well, it sounds like Power Grid was a lot of fun for you, and that it was like a genuinely enjoyable board game experience with people who were real experts at the game, but also that you could like dive in and really like put up a run for your money and also like make some interesting decisions. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was really fun experience overall. Thanks to the people who taught me how to play. It was a fun thing to do on like a wedding trip, and also it's just fun to see how like different, like it's cool that there's like gaming groups out there that are like, we just play this game. I kind of like brought some other games in my backpack. I was like, if you guys want to try these, I got them. They're like, nope, we're a Power Grid household here.
Yeah.
you know.
So awesome. Yeah, like lifestyle of games that feel like obscure games to be lifestyle gamers of.
That's that's like how I was in undergrad. Like we just played Settlers of Catan.
Sure.
And that was it.
Sure.
And we had a great time,
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where they're at, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. I love too that it's Power Grid. It's just so specific.
Right? Yeah.
They found their love. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay, Brendan, why don't you do your first? I think we said I was going to do all mine, but that took a long time. So I'd love for you to share your experience with this first game that I'm really excited to hear you talk about.
Okay, I'm pivoting on you though, but I know you'll be excited to hear me talk about this one too. You on the last episode were like, you should take the mind, because I was doubting that I should take the mind with us, and I was sort of like, the mind will. I suggested the mind. Maya was like, no, we shouldn't take the mind. And then we ended up taking the mind. And it was perfect.
Okay, I'm excited.
Yeah. The mind.
Yeah,
So
heck yeah.
we did play at a non-supported player count. We played at 5 players. So we were kind of venturing into uncharted waters. And playing at 5 players of the mind makes the mind strictly more difficult.
Yeah.
But the thing about the mind is that it doesn't really matter. Like, we were never in that first sitting of the mind going to beat the mind as a group of players. If it was 4 players or 5 players, we were there for the experience, not so much the potential of beating the mind, which is a very difficult pursuit even at 2 players.
Basically impossible.
Yeah, I was basically like, whatever, we're going to play this game with 5 players. It's going to be awesome. And it was awesome. It was hilarious. No one was. There's some groups of the mind where the first couple of hands. Okay, so for people who don't know the mind is this game from Wolfsgame Warsh that came out a few years ago. It's a deck of cards in value from 1 to 100, and the goal of the game is to play all cards dealt to every player in ascending order, and you have cards equal to the level that you're currently playing, and you start on level 1. So everyone starts with a hand of 1 cards, and you try to work your way all the way up to level 13, where you all have, like, I think it's 13. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's 9. Some obscenely large hand of cards, and you're trying to play your cards in ascending order to the table. But the only most important rule is you cannot talk. You literally can't talk. So we had this really difficult task.
Or communicate in any
other way. Yeah, you can't put up numbers and all that. Yeah. You have to, using your mind, know when, intuit to play your cards in the center.
That's true. You can telepathically communicate.
Exactly. You can telepathically communicate. And oh boy, were we not a telepathic group, which some groups of the mind, you sort of sit down and you find your groove quickly, right? You like both kind of know that, like, oh, this is about how long we should wait to play our cards in the teens. This is an awkward gap, but we're going to make it through it because we're jumping 3 digits ahead. And you have these huge, exciting moments where you win. We had a lot of huge, exciting moments where we lost. And that was still a ton of fun. There was a time, we got through level 1, fine. We got through level 2, fine. We got to level 3, crash and burn, crash and burn, crash and burn. So we kind of just like, okay, let's just try level 4 for fun. And I would say we quote unquote like played the mind for about 40 minutes, like loosely following the rules, kind of just having this fun magic circle of trying to do this task that we had an absolute blast. It's no surprise to me that the mind became the breakout hit that it was, just because of the moments that it can create. Like, the social experience is so good, even if at times like the game is too difficult, or if the rules don't quite hold together or aren't quite explicit enough. It just is fun, and like the magic circle it creates is really fun.
What do you mean the rules aren't explicit enough?
Okay, Jake, like sometimes like you can't communicate is so true. Like that's a good rule. But can I make a face? Can I pull back and reel away from the table?
Yeah, okay, I mean that's fair, but that's like the exact same as the crew or like any other
sure, but
like non-communication game.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of non-communication games kind of struggle with, and something that, like, Codenames, that provides a real specific sense of clarity around what you can do. You can say one word and a set of numbers. Why Codenames works so well for me as a non-communication game. It's fuzzier than that. But I think
though, people will mess that up though too.
Totally. Yeah, people say a concept instead of a word, and like, yeah. Harry Potter and 3 or whatever.
Yeah, right.
But I think in the mind it works because it lets you calibrate to what your group needs the mind to be. At least that was my experience of it, and it was so fun. So that's my story.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Did you follow the most important rule of the game, where before each round, everyone has to put their hand palm down on the table, look at each other's eye, and then only then, once you're ready and truly syncing your minds, do you create consensus, pull your hand back, and begin the game?
Yes, and then we also all said...
Okay, I was going to say, if you didn't do that, then that's why you lost.
We also all cheated, though. We said the mind every time.
Well, that's why you lost.
But it felt really fun.
Yeah, that is fun. No, that's okay. Cool. I'm glad you had a good experience with it.
Thank you, Jake. What's your next game?
My next game is So Clover, and this is a game I've talked about on this podcast a lot, so I don't want to talk about it much more here. But man, this game is just such a fun word game. Basically, I had a lot of time to kill on yesterday, before
Nice.
my late flight out. And we I met up with some friends at a cool bar in Denver called Grandma's House. Maybe some of you have heard of it. And basically, Grandma's House, they really like lean into the theme. So they have like, somebody's like, they have like it's like a little brewery. Like every place you ever enter in Denver is essentially a brewery.
For sure.
So they're one, and then they have like, so the person who like told me about it was like, oh, it's cool. It's like a brewery and they have games. So I was like, that's perfect. We'll meet there, chill there for a couple hours before we head to the airport. So we walk in, and it's like they have games, but it's like 100% the game shelf that your grandma
Your
has.
grandma
Like
has,
all,
yeah.
like yeah, like all these like super like classic games and just like incredibly worn out boxes.
Yeah.
No modern games at all to
Yeah.
speak of. But fortunately, I had some games in my backpack. So I whipped out So Clover. We had a group of 6 people, and we ended up playing 3 rounds of it. So Clover is the impossible to explain verbally word game where you're doing word association on a 4-leaf clover. I'm going to leave it at that. But it just like never fail. It's like one of those games that just like, some
Delivers.
games are delicate, right? It creates
Yeah.
like it takes like a very specific situation, like a very specific magic circle. And So Clover's one that just like is the opposite of that, right? It's like, if you win, you put your clues out there and everyone figures it out. That's like amazing and satisfying. If you get it wrong, like that's hilarious, and everybody's like yelling at you for like coming up with like bad clues. Like, like I had one of my clues was uh like the 2 words I'd associate was like mirror and cabbage, and I couldn't think of anything. And eventually, I went with like lettuce. I was like, that's kind of like the mirror cabbage,
Huh.
and
Did it work?
no, it didn't work at all. It was a disaster. Everybody's like, "What are you talking about, you freaking moron?" And I was like, "Well, what would you do for mirror lettuce or mirror cabbage? I don't know,
Yeah.
So just stuff like that, right? It's like great if you win, but it's almost even better if you lose. Everybody laughed. We played it for like an hour and a half or longer, and like we could have gone again, but we had to go to the airport.
Can you say 2 words?
No, you
Can you
can't
say
say
like,
two.
you can't say crystal ball
No, you can't say crystal ball. No,
for
maybe
mere
like.
cabbage?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, that's an illegal clue, but like also it's not a good clue.
Dang it. Nothing will ever top trailer syrup,
Yeah, trailer syrup
which
branch.
is also 2 words.
Well, that was
Oh,
those were the 2 you're
ranch was
associating. And
trailer and
ranch was
syrup.
the clue. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, so good.
So yeah, it's a great game, man.
I'm gonna get it.
It's a great. It's just a great one.
I was feeling a distinct lack of party games, Jake, in my options that I could take because the pandemic basically made it such that for 2 years or 2.5 years, I wasn't thinking about party games because it was just Maya and I playing games in our house, which was great. But it meant that when I went to like, oh, I would really love to have X game, I just didn't have it. And I probably should fix that. But the way that we fixed it on this trip was that we just played the game that kind of took over the vacation. I'm going to talk about another game that we played. Well, I already mentioned it. I spoiled it. Babylonia. That's coming. But the game that really took over the trip was just Celebrity, which people might know by the name of Time's Up or monikers. In my family, we call it Celebrity. Jake, we just played Celebrity like every single night. We played Celebrity so much we broke a lamp because people were so into it. And it turns out that lamp was this handmade porcelain lamp that was $500.
Oh
That my
no!
brother-in-law got so excited about winning a round that he knocked off a table. So TBD on how much we have to pay to replace that lamp, but we will
Vacation
see.
game part 3. We'll have to do.
Yeah, exactly. But it was such a blast. Like every memory I have of Celebrity, where Celebrity is just an awesome game. It's so true. It's so malleable. I love when you play Celebrity and everyone creates the topics, the prompts that you're going to use in the bowl, and it's just I don't know. I don't have to go on and on about Celebrity, but I just felt like sort of talking last week. I mentioned that we might play Celebrity, and I felt like I'd be remiss on this episode not to mention that we played Celebrity like 5 times. It was amazing. Every night we played it. People were like begging to stay up to play one more round of Celebrity. We were switching teams, having winners draft their teams, creating prompts around what you could put in the bowl, what you couldn't put in the bowl, all of these sorts of roles, and it was so fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've played Monikers quite a bit, and it's definitely an amazing game. And I think I'm ready to move to like Celebrity, where I can just like come up with my own clues, because at this point, like I know a lot of the words in my box, which is like an unfair advantage. It
Totally.
just is.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 more games on my list, and they're not even board games at all. One of them is a mega dexterity game. It's disc golf. I played disc golf at the trip at a really tiny little kind of pitch and putt course in Boulder. It was fun. My friend drove up, took me there. It was great playing disc golf with someone who's kind of newer to the game. It was a blast. The other thing that I've been playing or thinking about playing, talk about a game that really requires a lot of prep, hours and hours of prep. If you're weird and neurotic like me, and that is fantasy football. I am a huge fan of fantasy football. I'm just like a big American football fan in general. I don't really have anything to say of relevance to this podcast, but if you want to talk to me about fantasy football, we'll chop it up in the Discord. I want to pick people's brains. So for going those, Brendan, this is what I want to do with the last section of my time, and then I'll go back to you.
Amazing.
I want to tell a story that I forgot to tell last time about vacation gaming.
Okay.
And this is, I can't believe, I like was thinking about this as I was editing the podcast. Like, I can't believe I didn't tell that story. And this happened when my wife and I visited Japan, and we navigated our way to a board game shop in Tokyo. It's, I think it's called like
The Yellow Submarine.
The Yellow Submarine. That's what it is.
The legend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we go to the Yellow Submarine, and I'm looking around, basically like wanting to get like some souvenir games.
Yeah.
So pick up some stuff that like I can't get anywhere. I've like, been deep on like Reddit threads of like games to buy in Japan, blah, blah, blah. Like, that you could easily play without knowing the language. And this guy comes up to us, Japanese guy. And so he's like, talking about gaming and how he has like a game group here, and, he's speaking great English. So it's really nice. And he's like, where are you guys from? My wife Bridget, she's like, I'm from Mississippi. That's like in kind of the south part of the United States. And I'm like, I'm from Kansas. That's like right in the middle of the United States. And he like looks at us. He's like, oh, cool. I'm from Boston. It's just like, it was like such an embarrassing moment. And I look at this like Japanese dude again, like standing in front of me, and he's like literally wearing a Boston Red Sox hat. I'm just like, I am the biggest dumbass ever. It was so embarrassing. He was really friendly about it, but it was like just such a humiliating moment.
Oh, rough. The submarine's sake.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a good story, Jake. Oh my gosh. I feel like people mention that shop all the time when they talk about Japan. I really want to go. There's so many, like, I don't need to go on a fun tangent about all the little stores I want to go to in Akihabara, but one day.
I wasn't even going to attempt that district name, so thanks for getting that.
I got you. Okay, my final 2 games. We played Enchanted Plumes. It was really fun. I had to mention it. It's fun to teach Enchanted Plumes to new players. We played a 5-player game of Enchanted Plumes, and I feel so. Enchanted Plumes is one of my designs. It's a classic card game. It's really, really fun. Once you get up to 5 players, I feel like the deck, I always wish it was a little bit bigger, and I felt that a little bit with this group. But it sort of clipped around the table, and it came down to Maya and I got to make some like interesting decisions about the size of peacocks we were going for in the mid game, and she ended up clutching it out by 1 turn. I was pretty disappointed to lose to her, and she held it over my head for the entire weekend. But it was a fun game, and I always enjoy the chance to share one of my own games with new people. But the main event, Rainer Knizia's Babylonia. So I've talked about Babylonia a lot on the show, and I feel like eventually I really want to do a classic decision space deep dive on it, which means getting some plays of Babylonia on the table for Jake, Maybe even one day bringing Maya in, because as I said, Maya was the one who really wanted to bring Babylonia on the trip, which is very exciting. And we had a group of 5, so Babylonia plays 1 to 4 players. And so what we decided to do after some discussion was break into 3 teams and play a 3-player game of Babylonia, which was actually awesome because it meant that there was lots of open discussion about strategic and tactical decisions. That I think really helped the newer players at the table sort of grapple with the decision space of the game in an interesting way. And the game, I played it with my brother and sister-in-law, Maya, who's played the game about 10 times, myself, who's played the game about 10 times. Maybe we're up to like 15 or 20 now, and one other person. And the teach of the game was a little bit rough because my brother and sister-in-law don't play a ton of games. Historically, we've played games like Modern Art together, or even further back in time, Catan. I've also played Castles of Mad King Ludwig with my sister-in-law. She really loved that. And Kanagawa. Like, they'll play games with us, but mostly when we're around is when games come out. So they're always on board, but they're not sort of in the regular practice of flexing their game learning muscles. But this particular game of Babylonia, once we got past them learning the game, we sort of hit the ground running. Everyone took completely different paths through the game. And one thing about Babylonia, this is a tile placement game sort of in the spirit of Reiner Knizia's classic trilogy, like Samurai, or it has a little flair of Tigris and Euphrates, or even his newer game, Blue Lagoon. There's lots of these ideas bubbling up. And one cool thing about this game is there's this real tension between these 3 core ways that you score points: city scoring, ziggurat scoring, and farms. That create this really dynamic ecosystem where if one player, or one team in this case, pushes too far in one direction, it sort of like warps what's good and warps how many points you can get from a certain thing in a way that makes the decision space feel alive and organic and exciting. And this game played out so differently than most plays I've ever seen because everyone kind of stuck to their own little areas, which it's a game that's typically played very confrontationally. And this is a very confrontational group of people as far as people go and game players go. So I was surprised to see us all sort of turtled up in our own area. But it made for a really exciting late game where none of us really knew who would win. Maya's team and my sister-in-law's team, which were separate teams, they both pursued ziggurats really hard because they wanted the special powers that came with that. So my brother and sister-in-law got the ziggurat power that let you have 7 tiles to choose from instead of 5 really early on, which was really powerful. And then my wife and her teammate got these 2 other powers, and I sort of ignored them. And we ended up scoring 101 points to 106 points to 114 points. And it was just this amazing play, perfectly length play of that game for the group. And I think there were lots of tense moments. I came in second. I was very disappointed. I made this bet essentially that my brother and sister-in-law would jump in and score a city that would be really good for them to score, but even better for me to score. But I needed them to kind of collaborate on that, and that didn't happen. So in that not happening, Maya and her teammate sort of swung to victory by getting a late ziggurat and getting 10 bonus points from a special power. Just this amazing play of a really good game. So that's my vacation story. It carried through. We got it played over Azul, Cascadia, Trails of Tucana, all went to the wayside. We played Babylonia, and it was awesome.
It's fascinating to me that you subjected everyone to that, even at a not appropriate player count.
I pitched every other game, and they were like, no, we want to play Babylonia.
Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I feel like maybe you're like, or we could do this one that I'm really excited about, and they were all like, I guess we'll do it.
I kind of sandbagged it. I don't know. I'm telling you. I think it was the shared electricity that Maya and I feel for the game that probably snuck through. This group wanted a really interactive game. You know, last time we played a game with them, we played Cascadia, and they really enjoyed it. But I think that when they play board games, want games where you can be up in each other's business. And I think that out of the games we took, Babylonia was the game that was going to get us in a shared play space, really interacting. And then we all kind of stuck to our own areas.
Yeah, right.
It's hilarious. I don't know. It's just how it played out.
Yeah, well, very cool. I'm glad that you had a good experience with it. I'm just like fascinated because I would just never do that, you know?
Sure.
Like, is nothing sacred? Now we just play games at any player count? Shame
Oh,
on you.
you wouldn't play teams? It was
I you know no, I mean I have done teams. I mean, but not in recent memory. I think like
I love a
I
good team play.
I mean I think that's fine. Like vacation is a good setting to like bust that out. But I think like for me, sometimes I get like limited by my own collection of games. You know what I mean? Like it's like
Yeah.
if I own 100 games and they're taking up space in my house, like I'm probably not going to force like 5 people into a 4-player game. I'm gonna
I
probably
didn't
pick
force
like
anyone.
I know. Well, I didn't
I
mean
hear what
like
you're saying.
I didn't mean like you forced them to play, but I mean like you forced
I
the
hear what you're saying. I hear what you're
square
saying.
peg into the round
The rabbit
hole,
hole.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you're underselling the joy of playing team games. Like, have you ever
Mm.
played a 2-player game with 2 players on each side? Team game played by 2 on each side.
I mean,
So fun.
not that I can really remember. I mean, I
It's
play
so
like obviously
cool.
like 2v2 games I've played. Sometimes I play doubles in disc golf.
I feel like I
Like
feel like
there's upside to it,
let's put
sure.
our brains together and see who the combined brains are better. It's so you like discover these paths through the decision space you'd never see, you know?
I think to me, like, I hear that and I think like, okay, but which one of these 2 players is the active player and which one of
Mm,
these 2 people is like along for the ride? You know,
mm.
especially when there's like an unbalance between um like skill and
Or
experience with the
experience. Yeah.
game. Like, so you played by yourself,
I did.
and Maya, who's very experienced, played
Yep.
with somebody who's less experienced or has never played
Yes.
with.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and
But
I think that
they
could sound. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not like telling you that these people like had a bad time. Like it sounds like everyone had a
no,
great
for
time,
sure.
and that's fine. But I think like I don't know. I think like this that is like a fraught situation. I'm
I
not
think
telling
it,
people like nobody do it. I'm just saying like
I think it
I
definitely can be for sure, especially if someone's like taking the wheel and not giving any leeway to their opponent. But I will say the game Maya played, I think, was different than the game she would have played from that position
yeah.
on her own, which is it's fun for me to see. I
But it's
now
kind
I
of
like want to subject
it's
you to this.
I think it's just the classic like quarterback challenge, like with pandemic, right? It's like I could if I'm the most experienced player there,
Do
I
you
can
think
like
though?
I
What
could
if
say like here's an idea, you know, and either people are like, okay, well we should probably do that because Jake's played this way more than me, or like somebody's like says something and I'm just sitting there like, well that doesn't seem optimal, and I just
do
like
you
either say that or I just like gnash my teeth.
would we
I mean
have that
maybe
problem? Do you think?
if we played a game together,
Yeah. Okay. If we
if it was a game
agree.
that I think we definitely would if it was a game that's like we had like a big unbalance in terms of like experience in.
Hmm.
I mean, I still
Okay.
think
I feel
I
like
think we'd have fun like playing like any game together anytime in like
I
most
agree. I agree.
situations.
I
But
think that it depends on the type of game, though, which could reveal something interesting about decision space. Because I feel like if we played Castles of Burgundy together, 9 times out of 10, I'm deferring to you and I'm not arguing at all. I'm just like,
yeah,
Jake, what are we doing? Like, okay. But I do think if we played Babylonia together, there's a chance that because of the vast amount of options that tile laying games bring,
hmm
there's just things that you would see as a new player that I wouldn't even be considering that might be viable. So maybe it depends on the type of game. And the other game I was thinking of is Monolith Arena, one of my favorite games that like I've talked about on the show really rarely, but that's another game that presents tons of options to the player. So maybe games with high search factors work really well in this sort of team setting where you're presented with just this like huge space that you could play into, and having a team just lets you look a little broader than you would by yourself. I don't know.
yeah. I
This
think
is like
that's a
a,
really
a
I think
sub
that's really
episode.
interesting. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting too. And I think like what also is like hugely important in this like little thought experiment is the like stakes. Like how much do we
Yeah,
care about winning the
exactly.
game? Because if it's like it just depends a lot on the magic circle. If we're in like a tournament and we're playing like on the
Sure.
same side and we're like really trying to win, we probably lean way more heavily on the more experienced person. But I don't know. I
It
think it's
also
interesting.
could make games run way longer, right? You have the discussion and the back and forth, but I think in the
Exactly.
learning environment, it became a boon, just that people were sort of puzzling out what we were doing together. And it kind of evened the playing field a little bit, where I could chime in a little bit more about like, well,
Hmm.
this option gives you this benefit, whereas this option gives you this benefit. And then Maya might be like, don't do this. And factoring into, the other team, and sort of they were weighing the decisions overall. It was fun.
Cool.
And then can I sneak one other final thought in here?
Yes.
Okay. As my final thought in this Sundries episode, I want to talk briefly about KeyForge with you in this
Okay.
podcast.
All right.
Because, okay, you recently got a ton of decks for $1.
Yeah.
Can you tell me some about your experience? Like, so you took a break from the game for a while, I think,
Yeah.
right? During the pandemic.
Yeah.
And
The
then you got these
last
decks.
I played when Dark Tidings came out. I bought like a box and I did a draft, or not a draft,
And then
but like just played sealed with some friends.
and it didn't sink its tender hooks into you, because it, for many of us, did not grip us. I had a similar experience. I bought one box of Dark Tidings and was like, this is cool. I don't like it
I
that
don't know. I
much.
liked it. I had fun playing it, but I just
Okay.
didn't like. I don't know. Yeah, I guess so. I didn't like continue playing it after that experience. No.
Okay. So how was
I
the
guess I
experience
did.
of,
Well, no, I played online a little bit. I did.
okay,
Yeah.
a little. Okay. Well, how was your experience of getting those mass mutation decks? You had been like playing with Bridget some. Are you like thinking about the
Yeah.
game more again?
Well, so I got one box of Mass Mutations, one box of World Collide,
Okay.
and me and Bridget just were playing quite a bit together at first, and she was really so we played. We'd both open one, and we're kind of doing like a little like tournament type things where it's like if you like won with the deck, it would like stay out, and the other
Cool.
deck would like retire. And if you
Yeah.
won like one deck won twice, we put it in like the winner's corner or whatever. And we're gonna like sort of like play through the box that way. And we might still do that when Bridget returns. She's out of town doing her dissertation research in Peru for a few months. But she was really excited and having a ton of fun with it because she won like the first two times we played.
Nice.
And then I won like maybe like three times in a row. Like she was like
I'm done.
less enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
And that might have been all we played together. So those are, I've only opened like 6 or 7 of the decks so far. So I have a lot of like decks sealed up, and I'd be glad to play sealed with people, but like and that was still like overall a very fun experience, but I'm not like itching to like open them like I once would. Like I can't like just sit on decks of KeyForge without opening them. Like that would have passed me, just like driven me absolutely insane. I would have like torn them open or like used them as like a reward to myself while I was working. I'd be like, okay, if I work for productively for an hour, then I'm gonna go open a deck and play a game of
Nice.
KeyForge or something. But yeah, so they've just been sitting there. So I would say like my enthusiasm for the game overall is like pretty subdued at this point.
Yeah. So and you haven't been playing online at all?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Interesting.
Why do you ask?
I took a similar break from the game where like I was really excited for Dark Tidings, got it. I didn't love it. I thought the tide mechanic was sort of parasitic, and I wasn't excited by sort of the decks there. And now after a long time away from the game, I was really missing playing a card game. I didn't want to play Magic. We talked on the show about how like during the pandemic, I revisited Magic during Kaldheim and loved it. But then I kind of was like, no, I really liked Kaldheim. I don't really like Magic anymore. I just really like that set. So I was like, but I do really like KeyForge. So I started playing KeyForge a little bit, and then I started looking at decks online a little bit. And I was like, why don't I, instead of trying to buy really good decks, just try to buy some really fun decks that are still good. So I recently acquired a deck that I showed you in the Discord, which is a mass mutation deck that has library access, which is a card that got eroded from the first set and then was actually like reprinted but downgraded a ton in this version called library card, where you have to play it and then you can use it. But so the deck I found in KeyForge, you can have these things called anomalies. Wait, legacy.
Oh, legacy. Yeah, they're all different things in the game. But yeah,
They're all
legacy
different
is
things.
what you're.
But this is like a card that randomly gets pulled in from an old set and put in a new set. So I found this card that gives me the really strong version of a card called Library Access in a new set that doesn't have that card. And I was like, this deck looks really fun. I'll get it. And this deck, when I first played it, I was like, oh, this deck is fun, but not great. And the more I've played it, the more I'm sort of convinced this deck is just actually total juice. It's so fun. And all of its deficiencies I've decided like don't matter. It's completely changed my perspective on the game. And I'm having so much fun playing it. So I just felt remiss not to share with you. I also did buy another deck that I feel like is just legitimately good. That has Data Forge. We both played our friend, the Nick of Slots, had a really good Data Forge deck that I owned for a brief period of time before he purchased it back to me. And I was like, oh, I missed this card. I'm going to buy a deck like that. So I also bought that deck. And I've just been playing the Library Access one. So I just wanted to share that I've been playing some KeyForge again. I'm really enjoying it. It's a really fun game with really interesting decisions. I know on this show there's not like a ton of room for us to go deep on interesting decisions and specific cards and that sort of thing. But I'm just struck by how the systems in KeyForge create such interesting decisions, and so many specific cards in their design encourage strong decision points in a way that I feel like a lot of other games don't, in terms of the ebb and flow of the game. And I just appreciate it and love it and want to talk about it for a minute. And Library Access, wild ride.
Just like seeing your excitement, because I can see you now. Hopefully it's coming across like in the podcast as well, as like it's really infectious. Like it makes me want to play it more again. And you know, we don't really do news here, but I'm sure most of our, well, maybe not most, I don't know. If you're not aware, KeyForge is coming back. It has been acquired by a new company, Ghost Galaxy. And it sounds like they're doing like a Kickstarter for it to like kind of collect some of the revenue they need to relaunch. So, you know, I hope that it's
successful.
And I just hope it's great. I'm a little, I don't want to be like Debbie Downer on like anyone's excitement. I think this is like overall like fantastic news. But like what I would say is like I think I'm more excited for not this first set. Because the first set that they're coming out with was like already designed and developed by Fantasy Flight, as I understand it. And I've just really, since the first set of the game, first two sets, which were, it seems like reading between the lines, were the ones that were like that Richard Garfield, the designer of the game, had his hands on the most. If I've just like haven't been that impressed with a lot of the design and development choices. So I'm kind of like, it's like a risky proposition. Like I want them to relaunch. I want it to be awesome because we both know this system has, at least to me, like almost like more potential than any other game I can think of to just be like great. And I just think like it hasn't achieved the heights that I know it could. And I want that badly. I just don't know if it'll be like this first set. But like but bringing on their own developers, like I think, what would it be, like set 7 that comes out after this, or is that set 6?
We're on set
7,
5, so this would be set 6. So the next one would be set 7. Yep.
Yeah, like so I just like I what I don't want to happen is it like comes out with like a thud, because it's like another sort of like Dark Tidings situation where people are kind of like, oh, but like this doesn't really like move the game forward in any meaningful way. And then we don't get to set 7, which has the potential to be like
not so good.
The best. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're just doing a whole new segment, and
I'll keep it short. Episode now.
Yeah. I'll keep it short. Maybe we should have put more time for this, but I too am really excited. It's on GameFound. I'm definitely going to support it. I'm nervous because I think games like this need either a strong online presence to be successful, right? Like a supported client, or a strong game store presence. And I don't know that KeyForge is going to have either of those, especially with this first set, which makes me nervous. I love playing online, but it's not a robust space. And I think game stores probably got burned picking up a lot of KeyForge during the pandemic. It's not moving. And it's sort of like, oh, now you want us to stock a new set, even though we have all this old product. I think it's a tough proposition, but I too, Richard Garfield designed or inspired sets of KeyForge are just phenomenal. And you know, there's some good ideas that have trickled through, like enhancements and stuff that are neat. So
that was like, that was like the one thing that like moved things forward in an interesting way.
But some of the cards we've seen, juicy.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
They look cool. We'll see. Yeah. But anyway, let's call it there. That's enough on KeyForge. That's the follow-up on Vacation Games, and also some interesting, I hope, thoughts on ideas for recapturing some of the games we've covered before on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, as always, Brendan, for being here with me, co-hosting the show. And it sounds like we'll catch y'all on the next one. And thanks, as always, to Hemry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out.
Bye.